I would like to introduce our first guest of the day. Dr. Kerry Healey's career spans higher education, elected office, and foreign and domestic policy. In September 2019, she became the inaugural president of the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream. The center's mission is to make the American dream an attainable reality for millions of people around the world by focusing on four key pillars: education, health, economic opportunity, and entrepreneurship. Dr. Healey was our first female president here at Babson. During her 6-year tenure, she championed international entrepreneurs, created greater affordability and access for students, and oversaw a dramatic $200 million renewal of the Wellesley campus. From 2003 to 2007, Dr. Healey served as the Massachusetts Lieutenant Governor, where she led bipartisan efforts to improve services for the homeless, establish recovery high schools, and increase protections for victims of child abuse, drunk driving accidents, and sexual and domestic violence. Dr. Healey was previously a fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and is currently on the International Council of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and a trustee of the American University of Afghanistan and the American University of Bahrain. Dr. Healey holds an AB in government from Harvard College and a PhD in political science and law from Trinity College in Dublin. This morning, Dr. Healey will be joined by Miss Jill Shah. Jill Shah is the president of the Shah Family Foundation, which supports transformative work at the intersection of education, healthcare, and community. The foundation focuses on demonstrating how private and philanthropic funding can be used to test and accelerate innovation in government programs. In particular, the foundation's work in school food has shown that with small capital investments and the transformation of operations, the USDA school meals program can be used to serve delicious, nutritious, culturally preferred meals to students while increasing participation and creating new jobs. The Shah Foundation has extended their school food work during the pandemic through partnerships with the YMCAs across the state of Massachusetts and local restaurants to tackle both issues of unemployment and student food access using the federal USDA subsidy. The foundation is also funding a guaranteed income program in the city of Chelsea, which aims to help its most vulnerable residents fight the unrelenting impact of COVID-19. Jill is a graduate of Providence College, where she earned a bachelor's in English. Before launching the foundation, Jill was an entrepreneur in Boston and New York, involved in internet startups. She also served on the executive team during the turnaround and sale of Mercator Software. She sold her last company, Jill's List, which focused on the collaboration of traditional and integrative medicine modalities to MindBody in 2013. With that being said, it now gives me great pleasure to hand the conversation over to Dr. Kerry Healey and Jill Shah.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for those amazing introductions, and thank you to the Butler family for their investment in this institute that I think is really going to be so important to the discussion ahead. And thank you, Dr. Corbett, for hosting me and bringing me back to campus. So Jill, only a few years ago, discussions of UBI or universal basic income were considered far outside the mainstream of public policy discussions and economic thought in America. And in the context of COVID-19, however, some surprising advocates have emerged for this new approach to poverty reduction and social welfare. And so you and the Shah Foundation are now actually on the cutting edge of these discussions. Thanks to this groundbreaking social experiment in Chelsea that you and your foundation have funded. It's been invested in at a cost of over $1 million, and I hope you'll tell us more about that. But in the process, you're upending so many of our notions that have been long accepted about how to aid the poor and how to lift people and families out of poverty. So I'd just like to start with asking you about your thought experiment that led you to deciding to do this. You're truly an entrepreneur of all kinds. By the way, that is something that Babson appreciates. We want to see entrepreneurs in the business sector, as you've done, on social entrepreneurs. So you were working with the public school system around nutrition, and then what led you to thinking about UBI?
Right. Okay. Hi. Good morning, Kerry. How are you? And thanks for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about all of this, especially with you. So let's see, we started the foundation about 4 years ago, and one of our, we knew we wanted the foundation to focus on the intersection of education, healthcare, and community. And we're located in Boston. We love Boston. And Boston ends up being a great kind of petri dish for experiments that actually, you can kind of learn things there and take them nationally. And as we were looking at public school education, one of the things that kept bubbling to the top in terms of crises was school food. Principals would talk to us about it, teachers would, students would for sure, families, and 70% of kids in the city of Boston live at or below poverty, right? And that number is not—
Can you just say that again? Just say that one more time.
It breaks your heart, right? 70% of students, of the 54,000 students who attend Boston public schools, live at or below poverty, like our neighbors.
Yeah.
So it's an extraordinary number. And because of that, the city of Boston qualifies for 100% free meals. That's paid for by the USDA. The USDA has a huge budget that feeds millions of kids across the country every day. If you go, there's a trade show that markets to folks who serve kids meals in this country through school food. It's usually held in Vegas. It's sponsored by Pepsi, Kraft, all of the big brands that you can imagine who produce, a lot of prepackaged food. That food ends up on most school food lines, and probably everyone here remembers eating some of it if you had school food in your cafeteria. It was explained to us that that was the only way to do it because the budget wasn't very big. It's $3.41 a kid. We just decided to dissect that in the same way that an entrepreneur would look at something and say, really, is there not another way to do this? And so, when you take that number, you multiply it by 2 or 3 meals a day and by 54,000 kids, it ends up being a pretty significant size budget. Plus, the USDA also, gives you commodities, which in the form of free food. So we pulled together a plan in conjunction with a bunch of entrepreneurs in Boston who were doing food businesses. And all it took philanthropically was the build out of small kitchens that cost us about $100,000 a kitchen. The mayor swiftly took that over. And so the mayor's been building kitchens for the past 3 years. This summer, we'll see the last set of 30 kitchens going in, which enabled all schools across the city to start to cook whole, real food.
So people probably aren't aware of the fact that school food was being cooked, if you will, far away from the schools and then delivered to the schools. So the notion that you had a kitchen in every school, that had fallen by the wayside.
That's exactly right. Most of, I would say the majority, 75% of Boston schools, and this is true again, urban districts across the country have old school buildings. In the 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, we sent kids home to eat. And so there was like a break in the middle of the day. And so kitchens weren't really needed. And we certainly don't have them. And so we would find ways to put kitchens in. We took the budget, right? We reallocated it. We needed more staff. So we created 3 times as many jobs in the city using the same budget, $3.41 a kid. And we started buying whole, real food. Well, it ends up whole food that's not processed costs less. It's like total surprise. But, when you buy that prepackaged ham that's, kind of sustained in a saline solution, that costs more than just buying a raw ham and cooking it. And so it ended up that our raw ingredients cost much less than, and so basically we stripped out processing, packaging, profit, and started just buying real food and putting it in kitchens, teaching people how to cook. We did not have complicated recipes. We have these beautiful lines that, are a rainbow of food every day. And we've increased significantly the number of kids who not only take the food, which is how you get paid, but they also eat the food. And so it's incredibly important. So there's much more revenue coming into the city. That was our foray into one that was probably my most dramatic glimpse at poverty, because, you know, most of our customers, the kids, were living in poverty.
What were you seeing? What surprised you most?
I mean, simply that they, what surprised me most was the stuff that was coming in with them to eat, that they were spending the little money that they had at the 7-Eleven, which was the closest grocery store because there was no grocery store, and walking in the door with a bag of Doritos for lunch, or even worse, not having anything for breakfast, right? And really kind of being, that was affecting them in terms of how their schoolwork, you know, was going. We also, a number of the folks who worked on the lines in the schools are also living in poverty, right? And they're juggling this crazy tightrope walk that they don't want to take the more significant job in the cafeteria because it will mean they'll make a little too much money, right? And now won't be qualified to take SNAP benefits or some other sorts of benefits. So it's a crazy crippling circumstances that we've put people in poverty in this country.
So let's fast forward to this notion. Where did you first hear about UBI? Where did you first get this notion that you might want to personally, you know, through your foundation, invest a very large sum in doing an experiment?
Sure. So I was in tech forever. All of my businesses were in tech and in the internet, right? And so all of this innovation has been happening in that world for a while. And when you're in tech, you like see the future as being effortless, right? Everything at some point will be taken care of by technology, but leads you to also ask the question philosophically, what happens to the people, right? And there's this notion that it should create all of this opportunity for people to kind of live these loftier lives. But you know, folks who are losing their jobs where they weren't making very much, it also kind of prompts the discussion of how do we take care of people. And so there's always been this conversation in the world that I was living in about UBI. It was very theoretical. Fast forward to my work in philanthropy, and you start to see how giving cash to folks, one, you start to understand that people are people, right? Everyone's the same. People make decisions the same way. People are driven by the same things. And giving people cash directly might get rid of all of the bureaucratic wrapper that comes with, you know, social supports that are in place right now.
And so when did this begin? When did you start this program? Was it before or after COVID?
No, so the connection between food and the guaranteed income program that we're supporting is that we were asked by the governor of Massachusetts, Governor Baker, to step in and help support the city of Chelsea. And so we were working with the city manager, Tom Ambrosino, and his team to try to figure out how to feed people, because, you know, you've got a town where it's a little under 50,000 residents, 10% or more are undocumented. So they precipitously lost their jobs because they all work in restaurants, hotels, you know, other things that were immediately impacted by the pandemic. And they had no access to unemployment insurance or any of the other safety nets that were put in place. They had food pantries, basically. And so Chelsea had these achingly long lines of people wrapped around corners trying to access food in any way that they could. That went on through the summer. And we helped Tom and his team sort out the different ways that people could access food, right? People were really bumping up against problems with two things, food and shelter, and making sure they could pay for both of those things. And then, God forbid, they also got sick. Then there were, you know, all of the issues that come along with that and are also costly. In the summer, Tom was very worried about the winter and keeping those food lines going, and they were unsafe anyway, as it was, people standing so close to each other for such a long period of time.
And this is one of the areas most severely impacted by COVID within Boston as well.
In the country, yeah. One of the most severely impacted places in the country. So we kept batting around the idea that we just should give people cash. Like, let's take the rest of the state and city money that was going to be allocated to buying 45,000 pounds of food a day. Our group would throw in money, we'd help them raise money, and we should just start giving people cash. And so that conversation started to happen in July. And by November, we launched the program, the Guaranteed Income Program.
And so who came together? What was the coalition of people who came together to put this this program together? Because it's revolutionary. I mean, there had been one program in Stockton, California, but there just weren't a lot of experiments out there to model yourselves on.
Yeah, well, it's been really small experiments, and this is a very large. This is the largest of its kind, definitely in this country, maybe in the world. 2,000 recipients. For now, we've extended the program. It'll run through the end of August, and it was the head of the city, Tom Ambrosino. We had buy-in from the state. And it was us to begin. And then we started connecting with Mass General Hospital, has a big presence in health, Chelsea, both serving food needs and healthcare needs. And the United Way was playing a big role there as well. And so we all came together to fund the rest of the guarantee.
Public and charitable groups came together to do this. Now, you can't do it forever, right? So how much was the total price tag, or how much will be the total price tag for this program before it's over?
Yeah, so it's about $750,000 a month, and it will run over for about 9 months.
Okay, and you're serving 2,000 people. They get a payment each month?
Right, they get between $200 and $400 a month based on how big their household is.
And so now you've done this in a way that it could be useful to policymakers in the future. You've worked very closely with evaluators, and you're beginning to get some feedback already from what this program has meant and how it has impacted the community. Can you share some of those most interesting findings with us?
No, absolutely. So Jeff Liebman is an economist at Harvard Kennedy School. You might know him. And he worked both in the Clinton administration and in the Obama administration. He and his team are researching this as it goes along. So they're spending time with a cohort of the 2,000 who are receiving guaranteed income, and a cohort of the 1,000 additional applicants to the lottery who are not getting guaranteed income. And so they're looking at every measure you can imagine. So
that's an interesting part of this. You actually randomized this. This is a social experiment.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, we mostly did it because that was how much money, was available. But yes, it did provide for this, social investigation of how well guaranteed income works.
So you had people sign up to participate in the program. You had a finite amount of money, and then those people who signed up but did not receive money are now your cohort for comparison.
That's correct. That's correct. So everyone who signed up lives below poverty. We solicited people in food lines. That's how we got people to sign up, to make them aware of the opportunity. I think I told you the story before, but maybe not. Breaks my heart. About 3 days before we ran the lottery for folks to receive guaranteed income, we got 3 different letters at City Hall, all asking for their name to be taken out of the lottery because they got their jobs back, and there were people who needed it. They knew more than they did. So, I mean, it's so important, I think, to really make this real for people. I just truly believe people are not different. Right? We're just all living in different circumstances. And I've become a huge proponent of giving people cash because of this, because I don't know, because I've never lived that life, but I can see how hard it is. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy, to constantly live every day bumping up against, the first level, the need for food and shelter. Maybe you get to the second, you get to worry about your safety as well. But to never be able to get past those first 2 levels and to self-actualize in the way that all of us just do and take for granted, it doesn't make for a great America. And I think we're seeing that now.
So some of your evaluation outcomes actually pointed toward those self-actualizations that could happen if you had just a little bit more income. Tell us about the outcomes.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and this is also taking data from other experiments that have been run for much longer than this. But for sure, so here's a big spoiler alert: is that we can see all of the spending, and most of the spending, because it's all given out on debit cards, most of the spending is going to food. And then it looks like the second primary thing it's going to is transportation, and through questions, it seems like that's to get to work. People are actually getting their jobs back, and they're using this in different creative ways to actually live life better. All of them, I would say it's like 87% of folks are looking for more hours or looking for other opportunities. So this is not in any way, doing the things that we received pushback on in terms of.
So one of the important points to focus on here is that one of the arguments against giving people cash payments as opposed to giving them some kind of social supports associated with housing or food or specific activities, has always been that it would deter work, that it would be misspent, that perhaps, it would be a disincentive to finding work. And usually when payments or other benefits have been given out by the government in the past, there's actually been a work requirement in some cases attached to them. So what you're saying is cutting very far against that.
Yeah, I think, I think that the reason self-actualization is higher up on Maslow's hierarchy is because it's something that we're all built to do, right? And I think that's what we see in any of these circumstances. There was a great guaranteed income study that was done in Africa where, they found that most of the money that was being given out was being used very entrepreneurially. Like there, you could buy livestock, and you could then breed livestock, and you could also use some of the livestock to feed your family. And so, you think about the ways that translates here in the Stockton, California study that just ended. They saw a number of people use it in entrepreneurial ways, right? To pay for the first components of starting a house cleaning business, or to pay for the tutor to help their child get into the exam school. So there's lots of ways that folks use this money to lift themselves up in addition to just paying for basic human needs.
One of the findings that I found most interesting was around mental health. We are very aware of the impact of the last year on many people's mental health. The CDC has come out with some shocking statistics about the number, especially of young people who are considering suicide, who are experiencing depression and anxiety. How has this program impacted mental health in the community?
Yeah, I think we won't know. We won't have great data on that until for another couple of months, but the trends all are going in the right direction. We use a mental health screen that's used by the US government. And at the start, Chelsea was kind of on the achingly desperate end of mental health needs. And we are seeing actually folks who are receiving guaranteed income to have some sort of boost in mental health. I don't know how to explain that actually, and we don't have all of the data back in yet. Stockton, California saw that as well, that, having that level of stability and predictability appears to do something to the humans.
So America is now embarking on an incredible experiment that will not be, the 125 people in Stockton or the 2,000 people in Chelsea, but will actually impact a majority of people across the country. The American Rescue Plan of 2021 or the COVID relief bill, $1.9 trillion invested in COVID relief. And a lot of that is going to child tax credits, which have not been distributed in the same way in the past. Not only is the amount of the child tax credit going up, but people making $112,000 or even $150,000 for a family filing together will be receiving these tax credits, and they'll be receiving them monthly, as opposed to as a lump sum once a year. So this is going to approximate UBI for families with children. And a lot of the economists are speculating that this could lift 40 to 50% of the children in America out of poverty.
Amazing.
So how are you viewing that, and how do you see your experiment in Chelsea playing into that decision to include child tax credits?
I mean, I think, first of all, this is an extraordinary decision, and I am a huge fan of it. We have seen in studies time and time again that when you give families money to take care of their kids, they use it to take care of their kids. There was another, actually, it's not talked about at all. It has the worst name ever, but there was a program called PEBT, Pandemic EBT, that was launched over the course of the pandemic alongside of school meals. And this is because a lot of people weren't leaving their homes. And so they weren't picking up school meals. And so a lot of kids were, I mean, we doubled food insecurity amongst children in our state over the last year. In any case, I think this is an extraordinary thing. I think it's a genius way to fund it. I think that we saw two things with PEBT. You had to make sure that people knew about it, right, to apply for it. You still have to apply for the earned income tax credit. And to make sure that it gets to the people who desperately need it, we're going to have to support that process. You know, you don't need to make any income in order to receive the earned income tax credit. And I think that's a really important thing where, again, a public-private partnership is going to be very important. But I think that we will see extraordinary things come out of this. And I think there'll be proof points well beyond any of the experiments that we can run at local levels.
Well, I think it's very interesting that the expansion of the child tax credit has received so much bipartisan support. And I think that as we see the results, it may actually revolutionize how we are approaching welfare in general in the US. I think it's the experience usually that coming out of a national crisis or a decline in our economy, that the inclination is to raise the floor. But the question is, how do we raise the floor? And are there innovations that are going to make the intervention in poverty more effective than it has been in the past? Obviously, all of the investments in relieving poverty over the past have not gotten to the root causes and have not been effective. We still have an overwhelming level of poverty in America, which is unconscionable. So I think these experiments are really important and critical. And I guess my last question to you, though, Jill, would probably be, what's next? Like, what interests you next? Because you're clearly a visionary thinker in terms of how to restructure our war on poverty. And what are you interested in doing next?
The thing that, so we're going to keep going deep and long on guaranteed income and in giving people cash. I just think it's the most important thing. It's so beautiful to see America trust itself to let its constituents do what they will do with guaranteed income. There's two groups that suffer a little bit outside of that. For sure, undocumented individuals in this country are not, they're not going to be qualified for the earned income tax credit. And so we have to think about other supports that we need to put in place in order to support that group of individuals who are so critical to, I think, the continuation of America in the way that it's always kind of grown and thrived. And then another group that's suffering right now that we're not paying enough attention to are those folks who weren't employed, maybe folks who had just graduated from college, who weren't employed right before the pandemic. And so they're not benefiting as much from some of the stimulus money. For us, we will continue to go deep and long on all of those things. We also feel like education in America, a little bit, public school education needs to be blown up and absolutely transformed. We just aren't, we're failing such an important group of individuals in this country right now with the type and quality of education and expectations that we set for huge communities across the country. And so we are spending a good amount of time thinking about how to do that and supporting efforts that really encourage a different approach to education.
And what do you see that's encouraging around education right now? What would you like to promote and see more of?
There's beautiful curriculum out there that acknowledges the opportunity gap and really, I mean, the opportunity gap is a difficult thing to understand, right? But the notion that you or I were probably raised in a family that gave us much more exposure to many more concepts, subjects, vocabulary than someone who grew up and their family never moved within 2 blocks. Really never lived outside of 2 blocks of a particular place. And so that gap is what kids bring into school. And that gap is what quickly sort of, puts kids in different lanes in terms of where they're going to head for success. There's incredible curriculum that works hard at solving for that opportunity gap within school. I also think there's a lot of things that are missing in school around mental health care. I think we have to go deeper in food. And I think we also have to acknowledge that there's probably a different transition point, that we have to do something between K through 12 in corporate America that helps feed more kids into opportunities in this country.
Well, Jill, thank you so much for taking your entrepreneurial skills and applying them to these critical social problems, and for helping us think about how we need to be approaching the concerns and the needs of the poor in the context of COVID, but also beyond. So thank you so much, Jill, and congratulations on your work.